call to, let's take the roll. Let me see. Dick Benka,
Here.
Ruth Ellen Fitch. I saw Ruth. Ruth, you're here, right? No, she will. Ruth Ellen? He will come back. Jeff Rudolph? I don't believe he's here. Sergio Montigliani?
Present.
Janet Gelbart?
I think the room got kicked out, so now I can see that maybe that's why you could see people.
Okay.
Janet,
Ruth Ellen.
Bernard. Yeah, Janet will not be able to attend. She'll watch it afterwards, Bernard.
Okay, good. Ruth Ellen Fitch, we're calling roll.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, Sadaf Kazmi,
Present.
Mariah Nebrega,
Here.
John Doggart. Okay, John's not here. We still have a quorum. That's the alternates, John Van Scoyac,
Here.
Jesse Hafter,
Here.
and Cliff Brown here.
Here.
Okay, let's start off with the one item on our agenda, and that is updates from the Expenditure and Revenue Study Committee subcommittees on topics, timeline, and progress. I guess the way I suggest we do that is just start with the subcommittees and have them present where they are in their reports, and how quickly they can get to conclusion by February 20th. Let's start off with the town subcommittee. We have some new information in the packet regarding OPEBs that's related to the town as well as, I think, the Futures Committee. So who can handle the town?
I can start. Bernard, Jesse here.
Okay.
I'm happy to have, say, John Van Scoyac assist me on that. So the town subcommittee is at the current point in time has a document that is a framework for our final report. The framework starts with the charge of the committee, members of the committee, and the bulleted list of the reasons that the Expenditure and Revenue Study Committee was set up, and then the history about having it split into the 3 streams in which it's currently working to get to the final report. It then discusses the again, without the school information in any detail, of course, because the DOS team's working on that. It does reflect the current town deficit of somewhere in the range of 2.9 or $3 million, at least as at last writing. It discusses then in several sections the historical information. Janet's working on that right now about how the town's finances work, how the what its structural deficit, debt exclusions, things along those lines. And then it will eventually interleaf, closely with the schools, one to get an overall picture of what the total override ask is going to be. And then on the town side further, we continue to do detailed analysis with Charlie Young and Chaz and Melissa on the FTE situation in terms of where have we seen FTE growth, if any? What are the current challenges facing each of the departments based on the needs to have and presentations that were given to us back in July and August, and what those costs might, not only what the costs might be, but also what services and or other support might be lacking if we were not to fund at the level that's been requested. And then we've sort of included in the appendix the entire slide deck as reference for now. I don't think it'll all stay there, that the select board was provided by Melissa Goff in the FY27 forecast. So we have those one per page so that we can sort of easily reference them. There's some comparable town analysis. And then Melissa and the finance team are going to provide us a calculator kind of section that allows, once we know what the total amount is, what property tax effects people might feel. The report does not attempt to create a narrative that another team was going to work on in terms of how to say discuss with the public how this will happen. And we don't yet we do have some information, not in any very granular detail, from Chaz and the team about where reductions could possibly take place if we were not to pass the override. We were supposed to meet tomorrow, but due to my fault in not getting an agenda in time for yesterday, we had to cancel that meeting. We're going to be meeting next week, and then on continuing Thursdays with an aim of being on target to finish the report by mid-February.
Great. Okay, any questions? I see Sadaf has her hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Bernard. So Jesse, can you clarify? You said that there was another group that was supposed to work on the narrative. Perhaps I missed that. I wasn't at the last meeting in December. I did skim the minutes, but who was identified to work on the holistic narrative?
So what I've been told, and again, this was not discussed at the 18th meeting. I was also away and just listened to the whole thing through the video. What I was told is that the actual narrative that would be presented to the public is generally for overrides. Dick or Cliff could help out here. Generally created by a different group to communicate out to the community what the override ask is, and to describe, persuasively and clearly what would happen if it was depending on what kind of override we have, what situation we'd find ourselves in based on different scenarios. That it was not up to us and the subcommittees, for example, Sadaf, to say, well, what we're saying in this report is actually what's going to go out to the voters to think about, because this report is much more detailed than the kind of thing most voters are going to digest. So when I say narrative, I mean that a couple of page document or whatever it may be, that a different group of people will take, looking at the high level results of what we have, and then be able to convert that into something much shorter, right? That will, ours could end up being, a dozen or so pages or something. The one that goes to the average citizen who's going to be voting probably would have to be, reworded. I had talked about this earlier and was told there's usually another group that takes the baton from us.
So that group would actually draft the narrative for our ask in terms of an override. Sounds like, right?
Right, but is that...
No, Jesse's referring to the override campaign committee. And the point is that you don't mix the campaigning with the factual materials that come out of the town.
I see. So the point I think you're making is that that's not something this group will manage, which is fine. And then it's to whatever campaign gets assembled or not to address the messaging, presumably, was the point.
That was my understanding, yeah.
I think
Chaz, is Chaz on? No? Okay, I see Sergio has his hand up, and Dick is indicating he wants to say something too. But...
Yeah, I think if I might suggest that one of the things that today's meeting wants to do is not just get an update, but we should be discussing the framework of these reports. And my suggestion would be that they begin with the recommendations of the subcommittee to the full committee at the very top, whatever those are. And then would follow from there the discussions, narratives, appendices, technical, minority reports, whatever you want. And I can share a framework for what the future's outline looks like in that regard. But the more important question is that we need to discuss an assumption on my part, which may be wrong, which was each of the three subcommittees reports. We're going to go to the full committee, and the recommendations would thereupon be voted, at which point the full committee would issue a report to the select board with the subcommittee reports as appendices.
Okay,
I mean, you're following the logic here, right? Which is,
yeah, it means multiple reports are being produced, will be
well,
produced.
what's the alternative? The three subcommittee reports go to the select board? That doesn't seem to work, does it?
No, but I thought that this drafting group would pull those things together and produce a report, like you said.
What drafting group? I'm getting lost here as to who
Yeah.
is on the drafting group.
Well, this is what Sadaf asked too.
Uh,
Dick,
There was
you have
something
your
in the
hand up.
minutes. There was something in the minutes that I reviewed earlier today about a drafting group. It didn't name who that was. So that was a question that I had based on the
fair
minutes.
enough.
And I wasn't at the meeting again from December.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Bernard. I co-chaired the 2014 Override Study Committee, and my recollection is that I ended up doing a lot of drafting on that. I don't think we had any separate drafting committee. We studied the various issues that were involved and put together one report. That's nothing that precedent doesn't preclude a drafting committee here. What I will say I'm doing in this case is I am addressing one issue that came up earlier, and that's the issue of capacity to pay. And I'm drafting a section on that I will be presenting to the subcommittee, I guess, to start, and then more broadly beyond that. But that's something that we've been thinking about and looking at, and I think was part of the 2014 report. And Cliff, you may have some recollection of the mechanics beyond what I have. I mean, in my,
Right. So
it's 11 years ago at this point.
Yeah. So my recollection is that each subcommittee prepared a report, and that report was voted on by each subcommittee and then brought to the full committee, and the full committee voted on each subcommittee's report to see whether or not it would be included as is or as was in the final document that was produced by the group. The executive summary, if you will, was authored by Dick and Susan Wolf-Ditkoff. I was actually, part of that group, but that really came from them. And there was some back and forth because in that situation, there was a majority vote and a minority vote. And so you had two different groups presenting their own recommendations because, as I said, there's a split. I don't know that we're going to be in that situation here, but to the extent that there is a desire for any group of people to have a minority report, that is going to have to be written. A majority report is going to have to be written, and those will have to be themselves brought together in an overall report. I will say again, the majority and minority reports did not change the content of what was in the subcommittee reports. It really just became an issue of, okay, do we think we need X, or are we going to be okay with X minus Y, is what it really came down to.
Yeah, I don't have the 2014 report in front of me now, but my recollection is that at the beginning of each section, there was a vote noted
Yep.
on that section.
That's correct.
So
Okay,
I think what Cliff's describing is essentially consistent with what I was trying to
Yeah,
suggest. And there's one other thing that I think would be very important and helpful, which we should discuss. In my subcommittee's report, I am referencing to the reader, go look at the other two subcommittee reports in order to not replicate fundamental information, basic data, basic economic information, basic whatever you want. So somehow there should be a repository, I would suggest, that each of the subcommittee reports could refer to rather than each of us trying to regenerate that. Does that make sense or not?
It does make sense, and there are a number of things that are sort of shared sections, and I circulated, you know,
Yeah.
an outline for the school subcommittee. I know, Sergio, you sent me some comments, which I haven't had time to look at yet. But there are a series of things that are just shared in terms of the fact base, the background, right? So those are going to be components that you know will only need to happen once. So I think it would be. I think the approach from my perspective, Sergio, makes sense as long as it's not, you know, we aren't duplicating some of those things that are shared sections, because that's a lot of you know, a lot of inefficiency just given the timeline.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is to minimize
Okay.
duplication, which is why I made the suggestion.
Yep, and to the extent, and so it makes sense, I think, between Sergio, Jesse, and myself to perhaps coordinate on that piece, to make sure that we're not duplicating. We come to a common structure. You know, maybe in the next couple days, if we can. I think there is some urgency in pulling this together.
I mean, I don't know if anyone else has, but I've actually now seen the drafts from both the town and the school, and obviously from my own. And I can see right now they're not fitting together along those lines. So that's part of the reason I'm raising this.
Yep.
And given the
Sorry,
time
drafts of
constraint,
what? When you said drafts, what do you mean?
the draft of these reports that have been posted, the town report has been up for some time. The futures report was put up a couple of days ago, and the schools, I thought, was part of your meeting last week, but maybe I'm wrong.
It was just an outline.
Like an outline is what I saw. Yeah.
An outline, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that from that is where I was drawing the problem, that the pieces don't fit together right now. And the suggestion of the three chairs maybe is the right suggestion to resolve that. And I don't mean to derail the agenda, Chair Green. I just felt that since we're all working on these products, that it would be helpful if there was some consensus around how they might work.
Okay, if I'm catching your drift, you're suggesting that the three chairs will be what staff identified as a drafting committee.
No, I was
No.
actually suggesting.
No?
All right, I wasn't volunteering that. What I was suggesting was that the three chairs should coordinate this problem of common data should reside as a repository. And let's just be arbitrary. Let's say the common data belongs in the town report, and that the other subcommittee reports can then refer to that and not try to replicate it or duplicate it.
Okay, yeah,
Right,
no, I
that's
understand that, but that implies that there's someone or some group doing that and putting together our executive summary and recommendations.
Right, you're correct. I had not gotten to that point, but I would think that that can only happen after the full committee, as Cliff has pointed out, has had the opportunity to read the subcommittee recommendations and has taken a vote on each one of those actions which are going to be forwarded to the select board.
Okay, we're running short on time. So my concern is that I don't want to have a drafting committee, as I'm calling it, sit down on February 15th to try to put something together.
That's about when it will happen.
Pardon me?
I think that's about when it might happen.
Okay.
And we
I
have a
think that there's,
deadline, if I understand correctly, to deliver to the select board by the 20th? Is that wrong?
That is the
Of
goal.
February?
That is the goal, yes.
Okay, so February 15th is about right. We have to have a full committee, a long full committee meeting where each of these points can get, subcommittee recommendations can be looked at, discussed, and voted on. And then this executive summary that you point out is, I think, the right method, that what goes to the select board is a fairly tight package, and everything else becomes appendices. You want to know more about something? Go look at this report.
Yeah, even though it seems like a fairly straightforward and easy task,
Not
I just don't think that 5 days is going to be.
sure. So maybe we need to pull the calendar out here and assign a couple of meetings to the full committee. And then everybody can try to meet those deadlines.
I agree on the timeline. Also, the 15th conflicts with February school vacation, which, you know, may mean that some
Right.
people are unavailable. So just wanted to highlight that.
Well, I'll go a step further. I'm leaving the country on the 14th.
Okay.
I'll leave the country.
so that's
Okay,
how
so
you
you're
get out
not
of
gonna be on
drafting. Is that,
committee.
is that it?
I see where that came from. Yeah.
Exactly.
I know when to get out of town.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Sergio, I'll be leaving the day before you.
Okay, wait a minute. So now, this
So we
creates
won't
some
have a
problems,
quorum
I
to
think.
What's that?
And that problem is, we're losing all of our people once we're gearing up to write a report that has to be ready by the 20th of February. So you know, I mean, I guess my thought was that we would have a so-called drafting committee or whatever you want to call it, that begins working relatively soon, even though they don't have as much information as they may need, but at least they can begin thinking about the structure and the content of the report, of the final report.
Yeah,
We can't do that if people
John,
are leaving on the 15th.
John's hand has been up for a while. I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask, but I'd like to hear from John first before I interrupt him again.
Oh, that's okay,
Okay,
Cliff.
John?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You know, Cliff can testify to this. There was an advisory committee meeting last night, right, Cliff? That dealt with this very question that we're discussing in a slightly different way, in that the question kept getting raised. How will there be enough? Who's going to be in charge? Excuse me. Who's going to be in charge of running a yes campaign? So in other words, it's all well and good that we do our work, but there was a view that began to develop of if we don't finish our work soon, and it might already be too late, there won't be time for there to be the usual yes campaign to support whatever conclusions are arrived at as a result of all of this process. Cliff, did I summarize that correctly?
I think that the individual who raised the question broadly raised the question of timing. And
Yeah.
when the select board was going to be looking at putting something on the ballot, the perspective was, and I think we've had this conversation, that there's really not a heck of a lot of time for yes or no campaigns to actually, you know, get information and disseminate it to whoever might have an interest. There was also a question about public hearing. And that's something that obviously needs to happen before you put anything on the ballot. You know, I'm not sure what we can do about that, just because we don't have certain information. We still haven't gotten it yet. And so
Right. And my point in bringing this up is that I think it will help us to figure out the remainder of the timetable that is affecting these three subcommittees and the committee as a whole. If we first resolve the question of, are we a group that is intended to formulate the question, you know, recommend a formulation for the question and make the case for the question? Or, are we actually collectively responsible simply for defining the problem? How big is the problem? How did we get here? And what are some of the possible avenues for addressing the problem, either through an override or through some cuts or a combination of overrides and cuts? And what would be the impact of scenario A, B, C, D, and E, but not necessarily to be the group that then sort of goes out into the community to fight for the question, because there's an important group that comes next, and that's the select board itself. And then there's the question of, once there is a plan that has been voted by, let's say, the select board as to what the question should contain, there is also a limitation on whether town resources can be used, on any side of the question, but presumably, as a means of advocacy for the question. They really can't. So there has to be some kind of third-party independent entity that is purely there for the purposes of fighting for the question, but it can't necessarily be sponsored by town funds.
Okay, but is that the question we're talking about? I thought we're talking about putting together this report, which is in
Yeah.
shambles
Well,
right
but
now.
there's a big difference between a report that simply lays out the definition of where we are and how we got here and what the possible scenarios for addressing it are, versus our recommendation is that we should, formulate the ballot question as follows.
So,
Dick?
May I ask a question?
Of course.
In terms of select board timing. If we've been looking at this February 20th date for a final report, and then the select board putting the question on the ballot on March 26th or was that the date, or March 23rd?
Yeah,
Toward the end of March.
correct.
My question is, does the select board need a full month or more than a full month to do that?
Chaz, can you answer that?
I think it depends on your needs and the select board's needs, right? I think the select board is going to want at least 2 meetings to talk through this. So, the select board tends not to vote on something until they've had the opportunity to hear it. In this case, they may want to hold a public hearing, and not vote the same night. And so then you're kind of looking at the calendar from there, right? The sort of drop dead date on that is the 24th, I believe, of March. So I'll try and back solve there. So we've just set the date of the election is May 5th. And so, yeah, I think the answer is, if you wanted to condense that time to just 2 weeks, you could. But then it's the question of, does the select board feel it has sufficient time to review, digest that information? I will say, on our end, on the town's end, we are preparing. We're writing the budget book right now, and the budget book is going to have a potential override scenario and a potential no override scenario based on the conversations that are going on at the town subcommittee, with the understanding that neither of those packages is final. And ultimately it's up to the select board and then the advisory committee to figure out how all of those things are slotted together. So the select board will have some time to react, digest, and offer feedback on the town side of things prior to a final report coming out, if need be. And they will also have access to the school's budget, which is going to be published on the same schedule. And presumably that will provide some of the clarity that we've been looking for in terms of, the recommended reductions that are being offered, and then the request for additional revenue funds, both in FY27 and potentially FY 28 and 29, which would give us enough, clarity, give the select board enough clarity to start having the basic contours of that conversation prior to a report coming out. So if you felt that that was sufficient, and if the select board felt that was sufficient, then yes, I could see it being pushed so that you could have an extra 2 weeks. And then the select board has meeting 1, which presumably would include a public hearing, and meeting 2, which would be the meeting to vote on the language of any ballot question.
The reason I asked the question is I'm just thinking of the time realities being faced by this committee, by the school subcommittee of this committee, as we go forward, and whether there's some flexibility on the tail end.
Yeah, okay, so there is. Cliff?
Yeah, so I now have several questions and a couple of points to make, but I want to start with a question based upon what Chaz just outlined. Because it sounded to me like what Chaz just outlined was a process where, things weren't necessarily going to come to the full committee for a vote. That, that you're working with the town subcommittee, and the town subcommittee is going to be, the one who's talking with town staff, and they're working on things, and maybe the select board understands what's going on there in a way that the full committee doesn't have access to and hasn't voted on. And I am troubled by that sort of a structure, because it essentially says you've got 3 independent override study committees, and each one's going to, do its thing and make its presentation, maybe directly to the select board before that happens within the overall committee. And maybe I just heard incorrectly, but that's the way it sounded to me.
Yeah, it's a good flag, Cliff, because that's not what I intended, but I understand how that's getting interpreted that way. I think that's is certainly not the intent there. We have an obligation to present a budget book once the governor's budget is out. So it's in the bylaws. We have 7 days, I think, from the date of the governor's budget. We have a good idea when that's going to be, so it's early February. And historically, in years where an override has been contemplated, we've published 2 potential budgets. But I want to be very clear that in this case, because of the timeline that we're talking about, I don't want us to think that means that those numbers are set either way, right? Because the ultimate recommendation of the full committee is what is going to determine what is put on the ballot, what the select board transmits to advisory, what advisory takes up, all of that stuff. We need to put something out there so that the budget process can begin, but I don't think that makes it then the final document by any stretch of the imagination. I think we have a ways to go there, and you can actually see in your packets, there's a revised version of the town potential asks in your packet for this meeting, and as well as a memo from Charlie Simmons that reflects the potential updated costs of building maintenance and repair on both the town and the school side that he is working through, both with Bella and myself. And all of those things are going to have an impact on this. So I'm going on, but to answer your question, no, it's not that.
I appreciate that. Clearly, a couple of other things, Bernard. Clearly, as soon as things come out, it's going to be hard for people to change what they're seeing. But I totally understand the requirements, and it's a function of this absurd time schedule we've been on. Now, I do think that something that subcommittees could be doing along the way is that as individual components of their work sort of like reach a point where they're finishing or finished, as opposed to waiting for an entire report for the subcommittee to vote on. The subcommittees could start voting on individual components of what they've been looking at. And that will, speed up a process a little bit. It will help with anyone who's drafting the subcommittee report to sort of like be able to be started. And to that point, Bernard, come back around to your question, I do think it's possible for someone, and I'm taking a big step back here, to be able to start putting together what an overall final report might look like, or not look like in terms of facts, but sort of just begin some of the drafting, because some of that should be fairly easy to do, taking what is already available from stuff that's been posted. It's a matter of trying to walk and chew gum at the same time, because that's just the reality of the situation we're in. I think 5 days, Sergio, with all respect, I think that's really hard to do. I mean, it took a couple of months, a month or 6 weeks in 2014 to put that document together, the final document, pull everything together. That took a while.
Okay, so that, I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
so-
you finished, Cliff?
No, I was just going to say, so again, hopefully, if we don't have a minority majority report situation, it will be easier here. But I do think the 5 days is aggressive.
Okay, so that,
So, thank you, Chair Green. So I was going to suggest that, and I think we talked about this at the meeting in November as well. I do think we need a revised timeline with milestones. And I think we'll probably need this committee to meet more frequently if we're going to get through voting on recommendations. And I think just, publishing that schedule, I think will be incredibly helpful. It'll be helpful for me on the subcommittee. I know Dick alluded to this as well, but we had, based on our schedule, which I think is still aggressive, that we wouldn't have our report finalized until the 23rd. So that requires, some iteration. And I do think we will need to eat into some of that buffer, or really leverage some of that flexibility from a timeline point of view, just realistically. But I think it would be very helpful for me to understand exactly what the work backwards timeline is, and then we can determine what is and what is not viable within that timeline. And I would imagine that the other subcommittees would also benefit from that.
You meant February 23rd.
Yes,
Yeah, I believe that's what she.
that's right. February 23rd. Thank you.
So I think we ought to definitely plan on a whole committee meeting on February 13th, which is a Friday.
it's not earlier.
It's Friday the 13th.
Earlier than that, or earlier than that. Maybe
I think it was a joke,
Yeah,
Sergio.
he's trying. Maybe on the 4th, Bernard, February 4th, at least, if not for the whole
Yeah,
committee.
if that's possible, yeah.
And Jesse,
And-
your idea being that this is when the full committee might begin considering subcommittee recommendations.
Yeah, and I think that, in the case of the schools, if there is a delay in getting the data you need, you're going to have to wing some stuff together, because it's just not going to be, it's possible it won't be ready.
But I do agree with
Or-
the idea that there may be some subcommittee activity that might be ready for votes. I'm skeptical that there will be a lot, but so maybe it's a question of the 4th and then the 11th or something like that.
I think there are components of the work that the team has done already that we could bring forward to share. But the large piece that is missing right now, and that the subcommittee is trying to understand better, is the budget details,
Right.
because we saw that so late. So and obviously that's not something we want to wing together. I just wanted to be transparent about, there will be things that I think we can bring forward for consideration and review. And we'll have to just see how the next week or so progresses.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, Sadaf. Last year on the school committee, and Mariah can correct me if I'm off on a date here, but we really weren't finished with the budget until April. So, because there were reductions that had to be made in order to meet what we thought would be the town's contribution, right? Or what the schools were receiving. And so, given the multi-tier nature of what I think the school administration is putting together for FY27, is it really even accurate to assume you're going to have really tight data in time to put your information together by early February.
I mean, I think that, you know,
Can I respond to this on the facts before
yeah.
we
please.
talk about it, which
Yeah.
is that the budget request is coming in about 10 days, and that this committee's work will be based on the budget request, not on the subsequent work that the school committee would be doing to discuss a no override scenario or adjust to the current budget. The process that Jesse is describing is what we do when the revenues don't meet, and we'll need to work through that as a committee, but that is not what this committee would be focusing on, which is the budget request.
Right, thank you. That's good.
Thank you for clarifying. Yep, that's why I brought it up.
Okay, someone had their hand up. Was that Sadaf?
I
Or-
had started to speak, but I think Mariah's response actually addressed is sufficient. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so what do, okay, we're beginning to see a revised schedule here. If people agree that the big committee needs to meet maybe the 4th and the 11th to begin to pull together what we have into something approximating a report.
So I just want to be clear what the request is for the subcommittees for those meetings. So is I think the request is that we submit ahead of time so that people have time to review it, components of our report, to the extent that this full subcommittee report is not done. I think, the town subcommittee might be in a position to share something that's more complete. We won't be on the school side. So then I assume that we will submit components or some of the work that's been done and start going through and voting on that as we parallelize the other work that remains to be done primarily around the budget details. Is that accurate?
Sounds good to me. I mean, what do other people think?
I mean, we're trying to do the same thing set up on the town side. I mean, besides the updated document on needs that just came out as a part of this packet, we've been working with an earlier version we got from Chaz, and several of us from the town subcommittee continue to work together with some of the folks on Chaz's team to make sure we have the numbers right. But we're at a point now where, assuming there aren't any major changes, we should be able to have a sort of a workable draft by the end of next week.
Okay, so on a subcommittee level, we will discuss what we think we can share in that first batch, so to speak, for February.
And I'm thinking that it might be worthwhile for you, Sergio, and I should grab us for 15 minutes somewhere and make sure we're aligned.
Yeah, I think it would be great if we did that this week, just to align at least the outlines and the structure.
Yep.
And
Okay, so we're agreed on that, and I think it's also correct that I think futures would have at least 2 or 3 things that could be voted on the 4th.
Okay.
Okay, good.
In
Okay,
a
so-
way, it's ironic that the Futures Committee is the one that'll probably be the most ready to go.
Well, with the one caveat that some of our components, as others have mentioned, are highly dependent on school items. So, but nonetheless, I think some things could be considered by the full committee.
yeah, and I think Sergio, I think the good news is that the items that do overlap with the school subcommittee, those actually have made great progress. So I think we're in really good shape with those.
I would just add from the town side, Dick, that the 2.99 million or whatever that deficit exactly is, plus the FTE analysis that Charlie Young has been working together with us on, is pretty well along. So I don't see a reason why by the 4th we won't have that in some shareable format.
Good.
Good. Okay, so the 3 chairs of the subcommittees will work to bring that together. What some people call a drafting committee.
Well, we just want to overstep each other so that stuff we've written for town, schools shouldn't have to rewrite and stuff like that. I mean, we're working.
That's predominantly, I think, the point that the 3 chairs can help unscramble some of that.
Right. In fact, even for our town subcommittee, we've put the final report in a shared place so that members of the subcommittee can directly add material without overwriting other people's stuff. But that still has this boundary of, we're not letting school people go in and, or futures committee people go in and modify that report as well. Otherwise, we'd have our final, merge report before we're ready.
So I think to clarify, there's sort of two things that I think are outstanding. The first is there's a question about who's actually pulling together the final report and the core recommendations, executive summary pieces of the final report, which I don't think we addressed here. We really talked about the individual reports and bring those together in a format that makes sense. So this is what Cliff had raised, and we haven't identified that person or people. The second piece is, I believe in a prior conversation, we had actually said that if you're an elected official, you wouldn't be doing a lot of the writing in the proposal. So Jesse, I know you've done a lot of heavy lifting on the town subcommittee. Thank you for all your hard work on that. But I wanted to flag that as well. So that was in conflict with the conversation that happened, a month or so ago as well.
All right, I'll just say to that that I'm sort of, I wrote a letter to Bernard about that, and I still haven't gotten a response. And so I'm totally comfortable with stepping away from it in terms of what you were framing it as, Sadaf. But until then, I plan to continue pushing ahead as one of the sort of the, major contributors to what we're doing on the town side. Happy to step aside.
I apologize if I haven't responded. I'll look for that. I think, my thinking is that the issue is whether you are one of the drafters of the final report. Doesn't mean you don't participate in the work of the subcommittee.
It was
That's
clear
my
from
understanding of what the committee discussed, and I think Sergio brought this up.
Right.
That's
It was
correct.
clear from the when I listened to the 12-18 minutes, it was fairly clear that to me, which is why I wrote to you, Bernard, that the direct participation by the select board and school committee members was to be somewhat discouraged because of potential either bias towards their areas for which they're elected or blowback in terms of this public looking at an elected official coming up with certain perspectives or being involved in too deeply in the final information. I don't see it personally that way. I think I keep keeping that separately, but so that there's no appearance of any potential looking at it in a different way because of being an elected official. I'm moving ahead as fast as I can to work with the subcommittee to get the town report done, unless we have a conversation to say, pull back a little bit. I can look for that email, Bernard, send it back to you or something if you'd like. It's not a problem.
Okay, I hope you sent it to my town email.
Probably.
There's a problem.
Probably.
Jesse,
Anyway.
out of curiosity, who would be taking over if you had to step back a little bit?
Either Janet or John Doggett or Ruth Ellen. But probably Janet is be my guess. She's been the most active of the other three members. But whether or not she's willing to take the whole thing under her wing is unknown to me at this point. So we're just proceeding until I'm, if I'm asked to step back because of my position, then happy to, but otherwise we're just moving forward as quickly as we can to get this done by the end of the month or so. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. My understanding of the discussion of the committee, and I may be wrong, and maybe Sergio can sort of clarify this and straighten me out, is that the main thing was just the appearance as drafters of the report and chairs of subcommittees that we wanted to avoid, so that there wasn't the appearance that there was some bias there. But the sort of grunt work of writing out stuff is kind of different and should not preclude you in this case from doing that.
I think the bright line that I recall from the meeting was on the voting.
Right.
Well, the
Yeah.
vote is,
And I think there's complete agreement on that.
yeah. I'm an alternate anyway. I haven't been
Right.
voted, so that's fine.
So, and again, there's nothing here that's particular to Sergio. I'm just the one who asked the question, reminding us of past precedent and
Yeah.
asking the committee what they wanted to do.
Yeah,
I'm
and we
just
appreciate the
wanting-
fact that you use that historical knowledge to raise, what is an important issue.
So, but my sense here is that Jesse should continue as he's been doing, with perhaps seeking more support from his fellow committee members if possible. In the end, it's the language that is voted on. And that's the key point. And since there's agreement on that, I'm less concerned perhaps. I don't know how others feel, but
Yeah, and the fact that Jesse is on the town subcommittee and not the school subcommittee does help a little bit.
yeah, I think we did that intentionally.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
On the other hand, you do have, my colleague Mariah on the school subcommittee, and she's the voting member. So,
I also think that unless the select board is somehow putting up the town override and the schools override on separate items, when I don't think they will, then I'm not sure it actually, that there could be a perception of conflict of interest still on whether or not the townwide officials, I think it could still matter that Jesse was the author of the town side, given that the two budgets and the presentation is intertwined.
yes.
I'm not sure I'm following where that brings you, Mariah. What is your thought?
My point is that having Jesse remain as an author, even if it's on the town side, might still be challenging because we're all still townwide officials, and the override request is being presented as one request.
Right. And the reference to you being a voting member, I'm not sure I followed that. I thought we had agreed that you would not be a voting participant.
I don't think I made that reference. I think someone else did. And I think that at this point, at least I thought we had all discussed that on the final report, the subcommittee members can still vote in their subcommittee groups, but we're not authoring or voting. The townwide officials aren't authoring or voting on the final report from the full committee. That's what I had understood.
And the elected, select board and school committee members are designated, the primary designated members of the committee. That doesn't mean that we vote.
Mariah is raising a distinction between voting as a subcommittee member on subcommittee action as opposed to voting on the full committee's recommendations to the board, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that applies to both subcommittee and committee, but
Well, the way it was handled, for example, Bernard, just as a simple case in point, for minutes at the full ERSE meetings, when Sarah and I were both at the meeting, so Sarah voted, I did not.
That's an alternate question.
As an alternate, whether or not that's true. I'm sorry.
yeah, and by the way, voting on minutes is different from voting on the substantive issues of the committee.
Okay.
And the
In
minutes,
point
if you
of
vote on
fact, I
minutes-
think, Sergio,
Pardon?
I believe, in point of fact for the school subcommittee, I think we've already discussed not having me be a voting member of the final report there as well.
Okay.
This is right.
And let me just finish my point. Not a big point, but it's important. Voting on minutes is only saying that the minutes are accurate. It's not a substantive vote. Anyone who was involved can opine as to the accuracy of the minutes. Okay, where are we?
We need a parliamentarian. I think you were trying to get the subcommittees to talk a little bit about where they were, and I think we heard from Jesse, and Sadaf would be probably next if you have something to report, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that was my idea before we got off on important other topics. Sadaf, do you want to present where you are and I guess relative to our prior discussion, what do you think you can bring to gathering of the subcommittee chairs to go over in the next couple weeks?
Sure. So We've dug into a number of different areas. The place where we haven't gone as deep, I mentioned earlier, it should be no surprise to everybody, but really is on the details of the budget that was presented by the schools towards the end of December or mid-December. So there's some additional questions there. The schools are actually going to come back with some updates or refinements. I believe the school committee meeting this week, and then we will review them on the 26th, which is our next meeting on Monday. The areas that we have dug into that I think we could bring for review here is some of the work around recreational facilities, which we need to still review as a committee. There has been some work on enrollment forecasts and space utilization. There's been some analysis related to BEEP. We also talked about the school model and some efficiencies that could be gained from that. So those are some of the things that have the group could bring for discussion, I think viably on the 4th of February. There's some additional items that we're still tracking. And sorry, the teaching loads analysis, which is something that Mariah had led, I think could also be brought to that conversation. There are a couple of other things that are outstanding and that require some additional discussion, how we're going to handle the CLA follow-up. And there's some work that we were going to let the schools spearhead related to rental opportunities as well as the out-of-district placements, which would generate revenue for the district. They've done a bunch of legwork on that, which I think has been excellent. Zero-based budgeting as well. And I think that sort of covers the a number of pieces that we've done from a revenue perspective. There's some items in the bucket for cost avoidance. So Dick did some analysis on overall compensation, which I think could be brought as well. And then there was some work that was done before related to special education expenses for non-resident students as well. So those are the things that have been done. I think we'd have to, obviously, it's a long list. We'd have to pace those across a couple of meetings, and then the core budget components, I think we would have to wait on. Did I miss anything from the schools subcommittee?
No, I think it sounded about right.
Yeah, you've done a lot. I guess the question is, how is that going to sort of lead into whoever does the recommendation? I mean, I mean, what you need is the budget ask of the schools, which you're not going to get for a while.
Yeah. So that's the fundamental challenge that we have. So we do have, Dick has compiled a list of questions. We're doing a follow-up meeting on that list. I imagine we'll add additional things to that list or refine it further. And then we will need to see, what the schools come back with. I anticipate we need a couple more conversations within the subcommittee on that. And then, to how that sort of comes together, well, that's kind of that's the work that needs to be done. So things are incredibly tight. We also have had conversations on the different topics that I mentioned and need to bring those together as a cohesive set of recommendations, which I think is difficult to do without the baseline, additional clarity on the overall budget forecasts as well. So it's challenging from a timeline perspective, which is why we hadn't anticipated that we would have a report until end of February. And I think that that's optimistic.
Okay, any questions?
Or anything else to add, Dick or Cliff?
We can move on.
Okay. I mean, I want to be transparent about about
we can dig into details, but I think for this purpose, it's not worth it.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, just as long as you can take all this information and put it into some type of coherent form leading up to the final report. And And yeah, that's, I guess, what I don't understand. So, anyway.
Now that's the job of the chair of the full committee.
Okay. Okay, you gonna let me do that? I'll do it.
Bernard, this
Um,
is Mariah. I need to leave for a work meeting, so just letting you know I'm
Okay.
going. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariah.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, me too. I have to drive to a 3:30 meeting, so I have to leave in a minute as well, Bernard.
Okay, so the final item that we have on our agenda is Sergio's Futures Subcommittee report.
I think
Which
that
probably can be done fairly quickly and fairly
Yeah.
concisely.
I'm gonna do a screen share if I can do that.
Sure. Nicole, can you do that?
I
Or do you know how to do it? And
I think
Go
I
ahead.
got it. I think I got it.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Let's see if I can get this organized a little bit for you. Are you able to read that?
if you can make it a little bigger, it'd help me.
No problem. How's that?
Yep.
Okay. So this is the kind of the outline. I can walk you through it very quickly. I've organized it into 4 sections. I have an introduction, and the point that I was trying to make here is that this part here makes clear that people are supposed to look at the other 2 subcommittee reports, which contains information and data which is not duplicated here. Then there's a brief section on, the history, what our purpose was, and the membership. And then I chose to go from there directly to the executive summaries. And so those would fall in here based on the votes of the recommended actions, which we don't have anything right now. But then I did a summary of what are the items that were in consideration, which most of you know about. There's a new development initiatives, the OPEB question, which is just getting worked on, the solar initiative. And then there's the slew of school questions, which are pending the work of the school subcommittee. So that gave the sort of everything up at the front end, if you will. And then I went into sort of reports and supporting materials for that. And so each of the items that we discussed above, would have its little piece and a little write-up, if you want to call it that. And then for the schools, the same general idea. And then I put in a placeholder, which I don't know if there will be, but the possibility if there are any minority reports, it would go there. And the 4th structural section are essentially the appendices, which included their meetings, data and charts that might relate to the specific initiatives. For example, under the development, we may want to include some of the things that the Citizens Advisory Group is working on, or the discussion about the financial impact model or the model itself or whatever, those kinds of ideas. And that approach would follow, through for each topic. So under the OPEBs, there might be state regs. It would be the responses that we've just now received from the 6th floor through Lincoln, which no one's yet had a chance to look at, those kinds of questions. Solar, the same kind of idea, and the same for the schools. So that's basically it. I'm happy to go back through anything. But that was kind of how I was trying to organize the material and how our subcommittee materials would fit. And then within that, how to bring to the front of the report the key points, what are the recommendations, and then let everything else sort of follow downhill, if you will, to greater and greater detail. For those who are interested, they want to look up something, they can look it up.
Okay, any questions? Thank you, Sergio. I think that's it looks very good.
I think it's illusion. It's an illusion.
Well, it's a good illusion. And It's, yeah. Any questions on Sergio's report?
Or more important suggestions. If somebody has some thoughts about, is this a sensible overall approach? And if it is, then I'll tend to suggest a kind of similar idea to my fellow chairs, if that's possible. And if instead it's not a good idea, then we want to look for a different model.
Well, people
Resounding.
agree with me that it's a good starting point.
Boy,
Okay.
it's a non-committal group today.
Okay. In that case, why don't we just confirm that we'll have our next meeting on February 4th,
Fourth, right.
and then the following meeting on February the 11th. Both of those are Mondays.
I'm just wondering whether, as a placeholder, we should try to schedule something in between those two, even, and then not meet if we don't need to.
I think that's a good
Between the
idea.
4th and the 11th?
Yes,
No, I'm sorry, I meant between now and the 4th, but maybe Zadaf had a different.
No, I'm actually flexible about when it happens, but I think we will need more time is kind of my headline point that I was trying to make.
From now to the 4th is more than a week, and the 4th to 11th is just a week. So my suggestion to the chair was to consider scheduling something between today and the 4th as a placeholder meeting.
I do think you run into the issue that the town subcommittee isn't meeting until the 29th. And so, there's obviously work that's going to be done in the interim there, but I don't know how much new you won't have new information, at least from that subcommittee at that juncture.
I think that's okay. I think the outstanding things, I think we want to revisit our milestones and a calendar around who's doing what in which meeting. And probably some milestones related to when we expect multiple drafts to come in. So everyone is working against the same timeline. And we had something similar earlier on. It was just at a higher level. And now that we're getting down to the wire, I think we need to be more granular about that. That would certainly help me to plan accordingly. So that's one. And I do think it warrants a discussion around how we will pull together the final report, who's going to author it, and who's responsible for those pieces. Which
I might add the meeting of the 3 subcommittee chairs might also be reported back at an interim meeting.
That's right, and we might be able to pull together, at least an outline that's worth sharing. It's consistent.
Good. So, what is let's see, that's the 26th would be the Monday in between those two meetings? No,
Fine with me.
Might be consistent with Wednesday, maybe Wednesday, the 28th in the afternoon.
28th, okay. People agree to that as a holding place or yeah, holding whatever.
So Chaz's suggestion is the afternoon of the 28th.
Yes.
Okay. I think there's an ADU subcommittee meeting from 12:30 to 2, so anything after 2 would work for me.
That works for me too.
Yeah, works for me too. Unfortunately.
You say 3 o'clock, just to give people time.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's fine. I have a hard stop at 4, but other than that, it's fine.
It's not likely to be a long meeting, but
Yeah, I think that's fair.
good. Okay.
Okay, so and then we agree that February 4 and February 11th additional meetings to try to pull this ship into shape.
Yeah.
Okay, any new business? Okay, or other business? Okay. Then I will end this meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.